Imagine for a second that you are digging through that one specific drawer in your kitchen. You know, one.
Oh, yeah. The junk drawer.
Right, exactly, the junk drawer. So you're pushing aside, like, tangled charging cables for devices you don't even own anymore, random AA batteries, maybe a loose screw or rubber band, and then your hand brushes against something chunky.
Something that definitely doesn't belong in a modern pocket.
Right. You pull it out, and it's an old cell phone from, say, I don't know, 2004, 2005. It has an actual physical numeric keypad. Maybe the screen swivels completely sideways.
Or it snaps shut like a really satisfying clamshell.
Yeah. Or maybe it slides up to reveal this tiny glowing keyboard. And holding it next to the sleek, completely featureless, ultra-thin sheet of glass sitting in your pocket right now, I mean, that old phone feels like an alien artifact.
It really does. It's like finding a technological fossil.
It genuinely makes you wonder, what happened? Did we just suddenly lose our imaginations? Did we stop inventing new, interesting shapes for the things we use every single day?
Well, it does feel a bit like looking at a fossil record, like I said, because we went from this era of wild, unrestrained variety in physical forms to an almost universal uniformity in the devices we stare at all day.
Just flat glass rectangles everywhere.
Exactly. But there's a very specific reason for that, and it tells us a lot about how technology actually matures over time.
Which brings us to the core of what we are exploring today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are focusing on a single, incredibly insightful article titled Innovation Shaped by Products.
Yeah, it's a fantastic read.
It really is. It was written by Tobias Reidenhag. He is currently the head of design at a Swedish UX or user experience studio called Intunio. But what makes his perspective so valuable for us is that his career spans these massive tectonic shifts in the tech world over the last 2 decades.
Right, he's seen it all happen from the inside.
Yeah, we were talking about the early, super experimental days of Sony Ericsson, the intense platform wars during his time at BlackBerry, all the way to designing the complex, modern digital systems we use today.
It is a genuinely unique vantage point. I mean, he has been in the trenches for the entire transition from hardware-driven design, where the physical shape of the phone was the main selling point, to software-driven ecosystems, where the hardware is basically just an invisible vessel for the interface.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to essentially deconstruct the actual meaning of innovation for you. Because, let's be honest, we throw that word around constantly.
Constantly. Every minor update is an innovation.
Exactly. Every new tech announcement claims to be an innovation. But Reidenhag argues that true innovation is not just about, like, flashy new gadgets or a wild new shape. It is a very specific journey from those wild hardware experiments all the way to invisible efficiency.
And I'm telling you, once you understand this trajectory, it is going to completely change how you look at the apps, the websites, and the tools you use for work every single day.
It really shifts your perspective entirely. Instead of looking at what a product visually is, you start evaluating how a product actually behaves in your hands over the long term.
Right, and how much mental energy it asks you to spend.
Yes. So let's take you back to that kitchen junk drawer. Let's go back to the Sony Ericsson era of feature phones. The source specifically mentions the bizarre form factors they were exploring back then. Candy bar phones, clamshells, swivel designs.
And even more experimental constructions where the screen flipped around like a transformer.
It really reminds me of the Cambrian explosion in evolutionary biology. It was like this brief, chaotic moment in history where life just threw every possible physical shape at the wall to see what survived.
What's fascinating here is the why behind that diversity. It wasn't just hardware designers being eccentric for the sake of it or, just throwing darts at a board.
They had a reason for the madness.
They did. Because these feature phones were competing on very distinct physical qualities, an innovative mindset was actively encouraged and even demanded by the environment itself.
Right, because if you were walking into a phone store in 2005, the only way a company can get your attention is if their phone looks physically different from the one sitting right next to it.
Precisely that. You had dedicated music phones, camera phones, devices built specifically for heavy email users.
Like the old sidekicks or whatever.
Exactly. When products are clearly different and competing on those specific traits, the form factor essentially becomes the marketing.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, so if a team at Sony Ericsson is told to build a music phone, they have the freedom to put giant physical play and pause buttons right on the side of the device, or make the whole thing twist to reveal a better speaker.
Innovation was rewarded because it created a clearer, immediate market position for the consumer. You are physically telegraphing what the machine does.
Yes.
But tweaking external plastic hardware is one thing. What happens when you try to invent the future of internal technology before the rest of the world is actually ready for it? Because the article dives into a really cool, very specific story from Reidenhag's time at the Sony Computer Science Laboratories in Tokyo.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts of the article. This was a period where he was working directly with Jun Rekimoto, who is widely considered a pioneer in human-computer interaction, or HCI.
They were looking way beyond just making phones fold in half, right?
Way beyond.
The tech they were working on in that Tokyo lab was called Pre-Sense. According to the text, it was a pressure-sensitive touch technology. So it wasn't just registering that your finger was on the screen.
It could detect the different levels of physical weight or pressure from your finger.
Which is wild for that era. And it combined that with haptic feedback. So when you pushed harder, you would feel a little physical vibration or a click responding directly to you.
Yeah.
They were exploring how to adapt this exact tech for future Sony phones.
It was incredibly forward-thinking.
But I have to push back a little bit here. Wait, if they had this amazing pressure-sensitive haptic touch technology way back then during the feature phone era, why didn't Sony just completely dominate the modern smartphone market with it? I mean, it sounds like they literally had a time machine in that lab.
It does sound like a massive missed opportunity on paper. I totally get that. But this brings us to one of the most crucial boundaries defined in the text, which is the fundamental difference between an idea and an innovation.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. It's the difference between something working perfectly on a workbench versus working in the real world.
That is the exact distinction. Presence was an incredible idea. It showed what was technically possible. But the text points out that while the technology was highly promising, it simply was not yet mature enough for mass production.
Ah, right. Building one prototype is easy.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of it. You need a screen that can measure microscopic changes in pressure, and you need a tiny motor to fire a vibration instantly. In a lab, with carefully calibrated prototypes, it works beautifully.
But the real world is messy.
Very messy. It couldn't meet the durability and reliability requirements of a commercial product that you shove in your pocket with your keys, drop on the floor, or, use in freezing weather every single day.
It reminds me of trying to plug a modern high-speed USB drive into an antique typewriter.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like, the USB drive is brilliant, the data is all there, but there is absolutely no infrastructure or port to receive it yet. The environment just can't support the leap.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy. An idea demonstrates potential. But innovation is when that idea is integrated into a context where the manufacturing technology, the everyday usability, and the long-term sustainability actually work together at scale.
So if you can't build 10 million of them reliably, it remains a science experiment, not an innovation.
Exactly. The infrastructure just wasn't ready. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, think about how this concept eventually played out years later.
Oh, with Apple, right?
Yes. Apple eventually brought those exact same principles to market with a feature they called Force Touch and later 3D Touch on their trackpads and iPhones.
So they didn't do it because the idea of pressure-sensitive screens was brand new to the world.
Right. They did it because the global manufacturing processes, the underlying glass technology, and the entire developer ecosystem were finally mature enough to support it without the phones breaking.
So true innovation requires the right ecosystem. It cannot survive in a vacuum. But that raises an interesting transition point. If standardizing hardware is so difficult, what happens when a product arrives that does perfectly align with the ecosystem and completely resets everyone's expectations literally overnight?
You get a paradigm shift, which is exactly what happened with the transition from physical keyboards to the era of pure touch screens.
The launch of the first iPhone.
Yeah, that changed everything.
The article talks about how it didn't just change the market share, it fundamentally reshaped what we consider to be good usability. Before that, you were using a plastic stylus or a directional pad to slowly click through menus.
It was so tedious.
It's so tedious. And then suddenly, touch was everything. It introduced paradigms that you, the listener, take completely for granted right now. Things like flick scrolling, where the list keeps moving based on the momentum of your finger, and pinch to zoom.
It shifted human expectations instantly because the mechanics of those gestures mimic the physical world.
Right, it feels natural.
Exactly. If you push a piece of paper on a table, it slides. If you flick it, it glides and slows down with friction. Suddenly, users expected a digital device to feel direct, responsive, and bound by the laws of physical momentum.
And here is where we get the inside perspective from the source. During this massive industry shift, Reidenhag was working on user experience strategy for Sony Mobile's early Android phones. They were trying to catch up to this new touch-first world.
It was a scramble for everyone.
Yeah, and the assumption inside the building was that the floodgates of invention had permanently opened. The feeling was that tech was entering an era of endless, rapid interface innovation.
They thought everything would just keep changing.
Right. That every single year we would get crazy new gestures, new ways to twist our hands, and completely new ways of interacting with our screens.
It was a very logical assumption for a design team at the time, honestly. The iPhone had just rewritten all the rules of interaction, so naturally everyone thought the rule book would just keep being rewritten every 6 months.
Like, if pinch to zoom was the big thing this year, surely three-finger twisting would be the big thing next year.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. I want you listening to this to stop for a second and think about how you unlock your phone right now. Think about how you scroll through a website or zoom in on a map. Because the big surprise in the text is that endless wave of crazy new gestures. It never happened.
It really didn't. In hindsight, surprisingly few fundamentally new interaction patterns have been introduced since that first major touch revolution.
I mean, we got swipe to unlock early on. Later, we got like swipe up to multitask when the physical home buttons disappeared. But other than those minor tweaks,
We are largely still using the exact same core interaction paradigms established nearly 2 decades ago. The text serves as a stark reminder of a core truth about product design, which is that major leaps in how we interact with machines are incredibly rare.
but when they do happen, they establish patterns that persist for a long, long time.
Yes.
Why do they persist so stubbornly, though?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just a lack of creativity on the part of modern software designers? Are they just resting on their laurels and getting lazy?
Not at all. It comes down to a psychological concept called cognitive load. Cognitive load is the amount of mental effort your working memory needs to use to complete a task.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about a physical door handle. Once you learn as a toddler that turning a knob opens a door, that becomes a language your brain speaks seamlessly. You never have to stare at a doorknob and calculate how to use it.
You just turn it and walk through.
Exactly. The same applies to digital gestures. Once a user learns that pinching makes a photo bigger, that requires zero cognitive load.
So if a new phone manufacturer decides to make, I don't know, twisting two fingers the zoom function just to be different and edgy, they aren't being innovative. They are just annoying the user.
Exactly. It creates massive friction. The user doesn't want to relearn the mechanical physics of looking at a digital photo. They just want to see the photo. Forcing them to learn a new gesture burns mental energy for no practical reward.
We basically settled on the alphabet of touchscreens, and now we just use those same letters to write different apps.
That's a great way to put it.
But if standardizing touchscreens solved the problem of visual friction, it created a massive new problem for tech companies. If the major visual and interactive leaps are largely settled, like if every piece of hardware is just a black glass rectangle and the gestures are basically locked in, how do you actually stand out?
Right. How do you differentiate?
Yeah, how do you continue to innovate when everything looks identical?
Which brings us to one of the most critical transitions in Reidenhag's career, and that was his time working on the platform at BlackBerry. Because the answer to that problem required moving completely away from flashy, visible novelty and moving toward the mechanics of invisible efficiency.
I love this segment of the text because when you say the word BlackBerry today, a lot of people just picture the physical plastic keyboard.
Oh, for sure. The little clicky buttons.
Yeah, but the UX focus there at a platform and software level was entirely on communication, efficiency, and the pace of the user.
The goal was no longer visual expression. The innovation lived entirely in the mechanics of how quickly and smoothly a user could accomplish their tasks. It was about aggressively reducing friction.
The article gives some very specific mechanical examples of how they adapted that old physical keypad thinking for modern touchscreens. They introduced things like swiping up and holding slightly to enter app multitasking.
Which we still use today.
We do. Or, more importantly, swiping directly from the bottom edge of the screen to access this central communication hub where all your SMS, emails, and BBM messages were collected in one place.
Notice the mechanics of why those specific gestures work so well. By placing the communication hub access at the bottom edge, BlackBerry wasn't just making up a random swipe, they were mapping the digital interface to the physical resting place of the user's thumbs.
Because your thumbs are naturally just hovering down there anyway.
Exactly. You don't have to look for a home button, exit your current app, find your email app, and open it. A simple flick brings the information to you. It completely removes the mental step of having to visually navigate the operating system.
It reminds me of a brilliant referee in a high-stakes basketball game, or a genuinely great waiter at a high-end restaurant. You aren't really supposed to notice them.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Right. If the waiter is doing a tap dance at your table to show off, it completely ruins your conversation. But if your water glass is always magically full and the empty plates just seamlessly disappear the second you finish your meal, they were making the entire experience flow perfectly.
They're doing their job flawlessly.
They are innovating by getting out of your way.
That is a wonderful analogy for what they were trying to achieve. The text explicitly states that this was innovation designed not to be noticed. The goal was for the mechanical solution to feel completely obvious and natural the moment you used it, rather than demanding your attention as a shiny new feature.
And it really worked.
It did, and it is worth noting the business mechanics behind this too. In that high-stakes environment, BlackBerry systematically used patents to protect these micro-interactions.
Right, they weren't just patenting massive hardware changes, they were patenting the subtle ways the software flowed.
Precisely. And they didn't do it just to hoard ideas. By patenting a specific, highly efficient micro-interaction, like peeking at an inbox with a thumb swipe, they forced competitors to either license that natural gesture or build clunkier, more friction-heavy workarounds.
Oh, that's smart.
It was a very strategic way to build a strong portfolio and carve out a safe space for their own long-term UX development. They were protecting their invisible efficiency.
So spending years learning to design this invisible innovation forged a completely new philosophy about what makes a digital product actually good over the long term. Which naturally brings us to the present day and how this applies to the work being done at Intunio.
Yes, the UX design and development studio based in Gothenburg, Sweden, where Reidenhag helps lead the design philosophy today.
They worked on digital products, mobile apps, and highly complex technical platforms for professional environments like serious, heavy-duty tools. And this is where the philosophy really lands for the rest of us. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
It's all about your daily experience.
Exactly. Think about when you are sitting at work. You are logging into a complex logistics platform, or a human resources database, or medical charting software. You absolutely do not want the interface to be a wild experimental puzzle.
The last thing you want is a puzzle.
Right. You do not want to have to figure out a new avant-garde gesture just to save a client file.
Exactly. When you are doing your job, the tool should disappear. The core thesis of the article is explicitly stated by Reidenhag. Innovation has no value in itself.
Which feels like such a contrarian thing for a tech designer to say. We are so conditioned to worship innovation for the sake of innovation.
It sounds contrarian, but it is deeply grounded in the reality of human behavior. Ideas that don't solve real mechanical problems disappear quickly. The ones that do solve problems become learned patterns, and eventually those patterns become boring, invisible standards.
Because familiar interfaces create a sense of confidence in the user.
Exactly. When a user feels confident, they move faster. They are efficient.
So by willingly utilizing well-known familiar interface patterns, by making the digital buttons look like obvious buttons, by making the scroll bars act exactly like standard scroll bars, by putting the menu exactly where you expect it to be, the developers aren't just being lazy or boring.
No, not at all.
They're actually conserving their resources.
They are saving their true innovative efforts for what really matters. The most responsible form of modern innovation is often highly restrained. By intentionally choosing familiar visual patterns in the interface, a development team creates the financial space, the time, and the mental resources to change the underlying architecture.
The stuff that keeps the system actually running.
Right. They can innovate the data flows, the security protocols, the system integrations, and the long-term sustainability of the platform. You innovate in the engine room, not on the steering wheel.
You innovate in the engine room, not on the steering wheel. I love that framing. If you are building a ship to cross the ocean, the captain doesn't want a triangular steering wheel that operates backward.
No, that would be a disaster.
They want a standard wheel so they can focus on navigating, while the engineers make the engines twice as fast and half as thirsty. It really is about building digital products that last, and that earn the trust of the people using them day in and day out.
It requires ignoring the temptation of visible novelty and committing to far more thoughtful, mechanical decisions behind the scenes.
This has been such an incredible journey through the recent history of tech. I mean, we started by looking at those wild experimental hardware shapes of the Sony Ericsson days, that chaotic Cambrian explosion of feature phones where form was marketing.
Such a fun era to look back
It
on.
really was. Then we explored the harsh realities of tech readiness with the Presence technology in the Tokyo labs, learning the hard boundary between a cool idea and a viable innovation.
Ideas versus reality.
Exactly. We discussed the awkward teenage years of design after the iPhone where everyone falsely assumed gestures would constantly change, only to realize that cognitive load locks those paradigms in place. We looked at the invisible, frictionless efficiency of BlackBerry's bottom-edge swipes.
The waiter getting out of your way.
Yes. And finally, we arrived at Intunio's modern philosophy of restrained, responsible design, where the absolute best interface is the one you don't even like to think about.
It is a powerful, very logical evolution, but understanding this trajectory does leave us with a rather profound question to consider as we look to the horizon of what comes next.
Oh, I'm fascinated to hear where this goes.
Well, if the highest form of modern innovation relies so heavily on utilizing familiar, comforting interface patterns to earn user trust,
Which we just established it does.
right, will the next major technological leap struggle to be adopted simply because there are no familiar patterns left for us to hold on to?
Wait, what kind of leap are we talking about? Like what technology?
Think about things like spatial computing, where the digital world blends seamlessly with your physical living room,
Yep.
or augmented reality glasses, or even, neural interfaces that respond to your thoughts.
Wow. That's a genuinely brilliant point. If our brains are so deeply locked into the mechanics of the flat glass rectangle and the simple physics of the flick scroll, how do we react when the interface is literally floating in the air in front of us?
Exactly.
Or when there's no physical screen to touch at all? What is the familiar, comforting pattern for grabbing a hologram?
There isn't one. Which means to figure it out, we might find ourselves right back at the beginning. We might be heading back into the Wild West, throwing bizarre, chaotic, new interactive ideas at the wall, just trying to find the next mechanical pattern that actually sticks.
So we might be due for another Cambrian explosion of crazy shapes and gestures after all. We'll have to see if the engine room is ready for it. Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of this with me.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you out there for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you open that junk drawer and see that old swiveling clamshell phone, or even just the next time you effortlessly swipe up on your modern screen to check your email, take a second to look a little closer at the invisible innovations hiding right there in your hand. We will catch you on the next one.